Yay, thank you so much. So hello everyone out there watching the recording, the replay, and or for those of you who are here today, we thank you for being here. My name is Matthew Hegum. I am one of the co-founders of the Accounting Alchemy Network. We are here to empower accountants to change the world for the better, right? That looks like a lot of different things depending on the programming that we operate. We've got lyceums, we've got social forums, which is what you're going to experience today. We've got a lot of amazing content and conversations happening through our social networks, through Facebook and LinkedIn. We've got a newsletter, and you better be on it because that's where we announce all the good stuff first. And we have a lot of awesome other initiatives in the background, like the development of the JEDI training, which is Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion work. I know Donnie and Ingrid are working with Shana on that, and we've got a whole lot of other things going on. Anyways, we can talk about all of that later, but what I wanted to say to you all is that we're happy that you're here. We're happy that you're a part of this journey. And we're going to have an amazing conversation today around attracting young people to the accounting profession. So I'm going to give a little bit of context to this conversation because it was actually in a dialogue with Dan. I don't even remember how long ago that was, Dan, but we were chatting, we were catching up, we were talking about something related to the Accounting Alchemy Network. And I remember in that conversation, you said something about your kids and how you were basically teaching them how to become accountants, which I'll have you share that story in a moment. But then, of course, it got me thinking about just the conversations that are, I think, common and frequent in the profession right now, which has to do with the shortage of professionals in the industry and the challenges that we're having attracting, frankly, new talent into the space. And so I know at the Accounting Alchemy Network, we are also advocating for a new kind of an accountant, the concept of a regenerative accounting professional, which if you're curious about what that means, you can actually go to our brand new updated website. We actually have some content up there about what that means. But the long and short of it is that I said, well, why don't we pull together some folks and have a conversation about what it could look like to really make a difference in attracting young people to the profession. And so then, of course, I had to tap Donnie because I know Donnie's doing some really cool stuff in this space. And Donnie, I won't show your cards, if you will, I'll let you introduce yourself. But let's start with introductions. And Dan, since I talked about you first, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Dan Luthi. I'm a partner at a firm called Ignite Spot Accounting. I've been with the firm for almost 14, just so close to 14 years, which has been my entire career, which has been awesome working in the CAS or outsourced accounting space. I was blessed to get to know a lot of you back in kind of 2018, 2019, and it's been just an awesome journey watching each of you as well as kind of my own individual development since we got to know each other. And it's just been fantastic to be able to be an accountant, but also be an accountant in kind of this day of change that we're going through and be excited about what's coming down the road for us.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. And Donnie, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Hey, Donnie Shimamoto from the Inspiration Architect for the Center for Accounting Transformation. And the big thing that we really are doing is starting to help the profession make better decisions based upon valid data rather than just storytelling. And I'm saying that purposely because there's a lot of storytelling going on in this pipeline discussion that isn't backed by data. And we've started gathering data to have that more informed discussion.
Thank you, Donnie. Yeah. Appreciate your focus on proving things. It's very much appreciated. So Dan, I actually want to come back to you and if you could just kind of recreate a little bit of the story that you were sharing with me about what you're doing with your kids, because I thought that was actually a really interesting sort of entry point into bringing young folks into the conversation about what accounting is.
Yeah, definitely. So I would say probably the start of our conversation really began actually when I took my son with me on a work trip. My son was 11 years old at the time. And I headed actually to Intuit's headquarters and was there talking with some people, and he was there with me. And he thought it was just the coolest thing that his dad got to hang out at this really awesome big building, and he got to play video games and eat fun food all day long. But it sparked an interest actually in what I do for him, which has been really, really cool to watch him over the last couple of years with that. he ended up doing some presentations and some kind of research into becoming an accountant, which has been really, really fun to watch. But then I also challenged him to actually get QuickBooks Online certified. And he's been going through that process. And of course, he's 13, so it's not the fastest moving process to get him through it. And as we all know, that it's a very lengthy training system to maneuver through. But he's been going through it. It's been really awesome to watch him just go through that from his perspective and kind of develop and grow in it. And then at the same time, my older son is in high school, and the high school that he's at actually offers the ability for you to take accounting courses as a supplement or a replacement to a year of math, which has been very interesting. And so same for him. I challenged him to take those. And the cool thing about him is his classes are more directed towards business accounting. And so it's much more in lines with what the things that we do or that I do on a daily basis. And so it's just been really fun to challenge and have conversations with both of them regarding not necessarily just what I do, but really how accounting applies to the small business world, which is what most people will go into, after they get out of high school and things to that nature. And so it's been just really fun to watch and interact with them and answer questions and kind of dive into things further from there.
Cool. Thank you, Dan. Yeah. And again, like I just loved that as an example because it's not like changing an industry, it's changing a person, right? Or giving an individual a perspective on something. And I think a lot of this is what this is about. Now this is a social forum, so we're gonna go around the room in just a moment. We're gonna get introductions from everybody. But Donnie, I wanted to kind of circle back around with you first before we do the introductions and maybe go a little bit deeper to talk about what I was just saying about how I appreciate how the Center for Accounting Transformation goes a bit deeper to demonstrate and prove some of the trends and observations that work. So can you just maybe share a little bit about that? And then also I know that you're doing some work around the staffing research studies. So if you could talk a little bit about that as well, because I think that's going to be relevant as this conversation unfolds.
Yeah, that's actually where I was going to start. So, part of the whole reason where there's all this discussion out there is really because everyone's saying we're in a staffing crisis right now. And anecdotally talking to people, it was like, are we really? Like, what are we really looking for? And a lot of the focus has actually been on, tons of discussion has been on the 150-hour rule for CPAs, which there already was previous research that showed that the rule itself is not the barrier to entry, but that research was only done in Illinois. And so we said, let's see if this is a nationwide thing. So that was part of the research that we did around the pipeline as a whole. The other things that we did was additional research around staffing, just to see, is it really entry level that we're looking for? Because the 150 sort of fixed the entry level. It doesn't fix the mid-level. But what I kept hearing was, I can't find reviewers, I can't find seniors. So we wanted to see, like, so is that really what we're missing? Or are we really missing entry level? And then the other things, there was tons of things around like, oh, the students are not becoming accountants because the entry level pay is too low and they rather go do these other majors. And so a lot of all of these different things people think is the reason why students aren't majoring in accounting, we pulled together into a research survey where we went after students. So, because this conversation was all with the practitioners, the professionals already. And so we went and looked at that. Also, as part of our staffing strategy, we asked this kind of question internally, like, why are we focusing on CPAs? There's way more people. I mean, Dan is one of these that does really great work that are not CPAs. Matthew, Ingrid, actually, you guys as well, right? Aline, I can't remember if you were a CPA. I think you're not either, right? So here, just in Accounting Alchemy Network, we've got tons of examples of this. So why are we only focusing on CPAs? What is it that brings people into the profession? So those are a lot of the questions we asked as part of our research, both in pipeline as well as within the staffing area.
Thank you, Donnie. So for those of you watching or those of you here today, obviously you can see why I wanted Dan and Donnie to show up and be a part of this conversation. But let's take a moment to get introduced to the other folks that are in this space. And so I'll pass the ball to you, Ingrid, to introduce yourself, maybe share a few thoughts and comments just based on what's been shared, and then we'll pass the ball from there.
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, I'm excited to be having this conversation with each of you. This is definitely one of the big things that's facing our industry, and trying to go about it in ways that are focused on regenerative accounting and how can we draw people in from a more values-based perspective and without some of the programming that is offered in the standard accounting education track of some of the practices that maybe are not as effective as we'd like them to be. And how do we create a more regenerative approach in our education that is more meaningful to a younger generation who wants to have purpose in the work that they're doing. So I'm super, super glad we're talking about this.
Thank you, Ingrid. Who would you like to pass the ball to?
I'm very curious about Karen Maloney. I don't think I've met you before. Are you available to join us on video or audio? We'll give you a moment in case you're driving or not available. How about Michelle Greenwood? Are you available?
I am.
Hi, Michelle. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. So I actually came to all of this. I have a liberal arts background and became a financial advisor and went to a slow money meeting thinking, it'll be a bunch of aging hippies and I'll just get some, I don't know what, something. And then it turned out to be these amazing human beings. I got drawn into it, conflict with my licenses. And eventually, it took a couple of steps, but eventually I kind of went full on into alternative economy, regenerative economy, alt economy, all of that stuff. Worked with slow money for several years. And then I keep being drawn to this need for rigorousness. And so the language of business, accounting is part of that. I'm currently tax prep, getting my EA right now, but still waiting to have enough mastery. I know you never have total mastery, but enough of this language and these insights to build these new intersections. And I'm old, but anything bringing into new generations, innovation, all of that is exciting and fascinating. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to check in today. So very happy to be here.
Thank you, Michelle. And Michelle, I'll go ahead and pass the ball to Alina since Alina's next in queue. To you.
Yeah. Well, I used to be a CPA and did the whole traditional route. I feel like, it drives me. It's kind of crazy how it's already been 15 years since I graduated college. It's like, what happened? But I was in accounting for 10 years and then now don't do anything to do with accounting. But I'm excited to be a part of this group and have these conversations. And I'm curious if, Donnie, you were saying like we're focusing so much on CPAs. I feel like when I was going through school, and I don't know if things have changed, but that was the track. Like you're not going to do anything else. Like basically the big four show up, and if you're not hired by one of them, good luck getting a career. Because that's not what they're like. You know what I mean? That's not their focus. So naturally, that's where I went. But I would want to hear more about your research, and I'm excited about this conversation.
Thank you, Alina. So actually, Donnie, maybe let's turn it over to you for a moment to just share a little bit more. And, I guess one of the things that I want to point out is that there was a conversation in our LinkedIn group around a post that had been, shared about Gen Z. And then there was sort of a dialogue around, whether or not we should even be telling young folks to come into the profession because of the impact of technology and how technology is shifting the conversation. So I'm kind of curious, Donnie, like what's your perspective on that? And maybe even what are some of the misconceptions around around how technology is impacting the industry and whether or not we even need to be bringing people into the profession.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the ones that answer, and I'm going to apologize in advance if I offend someone, I think the ones that are worried about that are the ones that are not truly doing accounting. What they're doing is the data entry, they're doing the transaction recordation, right? They're not, that's not what we really do as the accountants. When you start to elevate up to the accountant level, and whether it's I'm going to call it a financial accountant, right? Someone in the bookkeeping space, or managerial accountant, maybe finance, whether you're a tax preparer, the core is not typing the information, whether it's into QuickBooks or Xero or whoever, or the tax software. The core of what you're really doing is, in the end, looking and applying judgment. Does this make sense? What are the implications to the client that I'm working with in terms of what they're trying to achieve, right? And how do I help them realign or improve whatever it is they're doing? So I often talk about the role of the accountant as someone that is helping a client be more successful. And while, yes, there's some of what we do in that looking at the historical, there's much more what we do looking forward if we're really doing our jobs. And this could be applied to any of the counting that we're doing. Often we're talking about the counting and money, but like Michelle just brought up, and I know Ingrid does a ton of work in this area too, around the counting of carbon or the counting of the other impacts into the environment. And that's why this whole ESG movement coming along is, how do we give integrity to the counting of other things like carbon? So I think when we think about technology, and also the crazy hours, I hate this work, a lot of that is the stuff that needs to be automated. It's that data entry. It's the going through all this paper records. And if we can get rid of that or automate that, maybe not get rid, but automate that, then it will become a much more fulfilling job to do your work as an accountant.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that you're sort of sharing, that it reminds me of another issue that we're contending with, or at least, hoping to impact at the Accounting Alchemy Network, is the culture, right, that has been created around the profession. And and shifting that a little bit around, well, what does it actually mean to be an accountant? I remember my first interaction with an accounting professional, which I guess I should remove the question, she was a professional, was my grandma. Actually, my grandma Hega, my on my dad's side, she ran a tax practice. And I just remember, like, not for nothing, but she always had money. Like, she was like well off financially, so whatever she was doing, it was paying the bills and giving her a lifestyle that was effective. And then she had, like, the downstairs was her office. It was a home office dynamic, and she was very well versed in finances and money. She was always listening to Susie Orman and, like, thinking long term about finances. And so it was really interesting to be a young person in that environment. But I also saw her work her can off during the busy season, right? She was like, there would be times when she would be downstairs working long hours doing the thing. And she eventually sold her practice to another family member who now maintains it. So it's sort of, I guess, accounting is in my blood in a way. But even then, it's the same thing. It's like there's this, like, lifestyle around grinding it out through this sort of deadline period. And I just get curious about, and actually, Dan, I'm kind of curious, like, what because you're dealing with these two young people who are interfacing with this industry, this thing that you do. And I would assume on some level that your kids have a perception of you relative to the profession and what that might mean for them. So I'm kind of curious, what are you seeing these young people experience as they see you or as they interact with this work? I'm curious what the perception is.
Yeah, I love that question, because I think it also ties into something that that Michelle and Elena both hit on, which is accounting as a whole historically has really been tax and audit as the primary conversation. The context that Donnie talked about also too, which is more of we could say financial or cost accounting, or the lower level work, which is what it was perceived to me when I first started in the accounting space, is not often discussed. It's not the other areas, with carbon, transactions and things of that nature, and Bitcoin and things to all these different things, and even down to just the minutia of back office work at an organization that has 2 people or less, or things to that nature. None of that is a primary conversation, and that's really where my conversation starts with my kids. When my son did one of his presentations that he worked on, it focused heavily on the tax and audit side. The primary portion of his research dove into, busy season and things to that nature, and needing to be really familiar with a calculator, and really understanding how to look at line by line details on a tax form and things of that nature. And that's always been something that we've talked very heavily about, that's not what I do. That's not a part of anything I do. I'm not a tax accountant in any way, shape, or form. I've never actually filed my own taxes outside of using TurboTax for a couple of years. But like, to that same point, it's not who I am. And so we talk very, in long talk conversation about how there's so much more that can come into the accounting space. There's so much more conversation that can be evolved from it, whether it's and I'll actually go back to one of the initial conversations or from me and Donnie's first interaction, actually, which was process management as a part of accounting, and setting up systems and making sure communication and data moved on a fluid format. And those kind of things are exciting. That's what's really that I'm seeing with the young people I interact with. They get excited about those things because it still allows them to be creative. It still allows them to be able to think outside of the black and white minutia of what I felt like I was taught in my education, to something that's actually can be fun, something that they can put their heart and their mind into, that's not just law driven, or having to follow rigorous boundaries. It's something that they can still be able to participate and try and tinker and play, and be able to present a story to someone on how their business can run. And I just love the context that all 3 of you brought up in that framework, because that's really where my energy's been flowing with the conversations with my kids. And it's honestly where the energy goes in our organization as well, because we don't do tax or audit or anything like that. We just do financial accounting and process management and system integrations and things like that, which has been super fun.
I love, Dan, that you brought up the storytelling. And one of the articles I have out on CPA Trendlines is, do you have the power of insightful storytelling? Because I think that is one of the superpowers that we as accountants have, and it's particularly in the finance area. Whether you're a controller, a CFO, a bookkeeper, that is what we're doing, is we're helping the business owner or the public, and as the case may be, say, hey, here's the story. Or we may be helping other people. Say you're in a mid-sized organization, you're helping the other people in the other departments understand, here's your numbers, and this is the story that your numbers tell. Now, do we want this to be the ongoing story, or do we want to change what this future story is?
Yeah.
That's right. And helping them understand what are the levers that I have. That's what I describe in that article. This is a power that we have, is to effectively interpret the data and tell you what it really means, and then help you figure out through process, through the other things, this is what you have to change to have a better story.
And I love that you bring that up from the story standpoint, because I also think it ties to a kind of an age-old adage that accountants has had, which is, what are the numbers? Well, what do you want them to be? That's not what you're saying at all in this conversation, which I think is super important to be clear with. We know the tax law has not loopholes, but has different ways of maneuvering through things. And yeah, there is loopholes in it. But the goal in the conversation of what you're talking about, which I think is even more important, is there's so much that impacts a business, whether it's small, medium, or large enterprise, whatever it is, that different types of inputs and different types of outputs can change the way the organization functions very, very quickly. It can change the way the organization makes money or doesn't, the way it can invest, the way it can maneuver in different areas. And it all comes from that data that's pulling into a single spot. It can change an initiative. It can change all those things. And so when you think about it, outside of just that black and white financial statement numbers, and you're having a conversation about goals and objectives and intent, it completely changes the game. It completely changes the opportunity that's available to you. And that's the part I love about what you just said, because that's where people get the ability to connect at a very different level than what they did before. And honestly, where you don't need sometimes an accounting degree to be able to have a real conversation, because you're not translating applications or financial meetings from a tax return. You're translating a financial story that has opportunities to adjust and opportunities to move around to really meet your needs and what your goals are.
I think what you're raising too also lends towards, so this is part of the role of the auditor in the profession. It is to say this story is valid and you can listen to it, right? Whether it's an internal audit or whether it's the external audit telling the public, these financial statements are true and accurate to our knowledge based upon our testing. On the tax side, you've also got the tax person who's like, is this really this expense, right? I know you're trying to deduct this, but is this really a business expense, right? Especially when you're working with those maybe early stage business owners that don't really understand what, I can't write off every single meal. Can't I do that? Like, I can't write off my Netflix subscription, but I'm doing research for my thing. Those are the things that I think where we bring integrity. And that's another thing, coming back to the pipeline, they don't realize that that's our role, is to help ensure all these numbers have integrity. And bridging this over back into the ESG and the carbon accounting, I hear a lot of people like, oh, here we go. It's going to be another one of these things, and we're going to have greenwashing. But that's where I see the role of our profession is, hey, we got to make sure, whether we're the ones helping prepare the numbers, which would be the equivalent of the finance side, or we're the ones attesting to the numbers, which is the auditor side, we got to make sure that these things really do make sense. And it's not this, hey, here's not this petroleum company that's top in the ESG ratings. I mean, these are all the types of things that are playing themselves out right now as we're refining the international standards around ESG.
So one of the things that, thank you, Tony. So one of the things that I'm really curious about, and maybe I'll sort of put it in the form of a question and ask everybody who's willing to respond, is, I remember when I first came into the accounting profession, it was not through a traditional doorway, right? I was actually the development and communications director for a nonprofit agency, teaching unemployed and low-income individuals how to enter into the workforce as bookkeeping professionals. So I was a communications and marketing person at the end of the day, right? But what happened is I wanted to be able to tell the story, right, of the people who were going through this program. So I enrolled myself in the program. It was a year-long accounting program, and that's where I learned how to create, T accounts and do debits and credits and learn QuickBooks and all that fun stuff. And and I had known bookkeepers up to that point and accountants up to that point, but my only perception of them was either one, they do something that has to do with forms and taxes and government and giving the government money. It's like, yay, okay. Or they sit in front of a computer with a stack of papers for hours, and they have to get all that paperwork into that Excel spreadsheet, and that's their job, right? And that was sort of the two tracks that existed for accountants, or for this accountant person in my mind. Then I went through this program and learned more clearly what it meant to be, in this example, a small business bookkeeper. And the work that I was doing in that organization was around workforce development and job training, and ultimately was about job security, right? How do we get people jobs that will sustain them for the long run, right? And then I started to realize, like, wait a second, these are the accountants. These are the people that are making sure that the bills are getting paid, that the lights are staying on, that these people that they're employing are actually able to stay employed. And so then I started to realize, like, oh wow, so they're like the backbone of job security in some ways, in terms of at least maintaining the financial systems and the cash flow. And it sort of opened up my mind to the idea that well, and then I got introduced to accounting technology, and that was like a whole other, like, oh wow, that was like a whole other can of worms that went down a very long, juicy path. But I realized, and then at one point I got introduced to like the world of accounting above and beyond those two roles, and all of a sudden I started to realize, for example, that wow, you do need strategic thinkers, you do need problem solvers, you do need creativity inside of the realm of accounting and finance, and you, not as much as you need people who know how to fill out the forms and maintain compliance, you need this other thing called management and accounting. And then that's where I really gained a perspective on what a CFO was and the importance and value that a CFO had towards a small business. And so now I look back and I'm, I kind of joke with people. I do a lot of work around business development, sales, and marketing for and inside of the accounting space, and often will refer CPAs to friends and colleagues who are looking for accountants, and throughout that experience, I'm constantly reminded of, oh gosh, if I was an accountant, I would have a full book of business. Because the truth is there's a demand out there for the work that we do, a very high demand. There seems to, even with me, and I know a lot of accounting professionals, there's never enough people that I can refer out, either because those people I'm referring out are just too busy, they've got full books of business, they're not taking on any more clients, or I just don't know anybody else to offer to the people that I know who are looking for referrals. And so even from a business builder's perspective, I start to think like, oh gosh, if I was if I ran an accounting firm, like there's plenty of business out there. So I start thinking about all of the different sort of seats that a talented young person could sit inside of and grow into becoming inside of the profession. And I start to think, okay, well, we're definitely not marketing the profession effectively, right? From a perception perspective, it's like we make it out to be that it's one thing, and then we make it out, to Alina's point, that and not only is it one thing, but there's one path, and this is the path, and if you don't do that, you're not going to make it. And so I guess the question I want to ask you all is this: if you were sitting in front of a room full of, let's say, 100 high school students, right, and you had to say to them something about the accounting profession, like here's, and it could be like, here's why, or here's what, or let me reframe it. It's like, think about yourself in that room. If you could tell yourself and this room of 100 people, kids, something about the profession that you learned as a result of being in the profession, like what is that thing that you would communicate to these young people? And anyone can answer. We'll go with whoever comes off mute or speaks first.
I can dive in.
Go for it.
I think if I were that high schooler, the thing that would have really grabbed my attention at that point, and I would have said, oh, I'm paying attention, would have been something along the lines of accounting can be how we account for the things that we want to hold ourselves accountable to. That this is one of the most effective paths to justice in our world. And that accounting professionals are the ones responsible for holding our people or organizations accountable to the agreements that they're making, and making sure that we're making the right agreements. And being the, kind of justice-focused teenager that I was, that would have gotten my attention. That would have meant something to me. Making it all about money and finance, it's like, oh gosh, it's more destructive, exploitation and division and extraction from our peoples and our planet. How do we create something that means something to us? And I feel like even more since then, young people have become much more passion and purpose focused. And so really focusing on accounting being accountability. And what does that look like to change that message, rather than it being, we're the rubber stamp that makes it so that our world's biggest corporations can get away with literally murder. How do we fix it?
I love that, Ingrid. I think that ties into what we were just talking about earlier about the integrity, and what we don't emphasize enough is the ethics of our profession and the fact that we uphold this high ethical conduct and put our clients ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
CPAs are the most trusted advisor, and I know that as a financial advisor, so there is that. I also think that I would emphasize that, well, I was liberal arts, so the language of business, that it is the language of business. And I would also note that you can position, if you know that language, that you can serve these larger, bigger pictures around sustainability, social justice, any of these things through the language of business, through this accountability. And I would highlight, you can do everything from serving your tech startup, your AI, whatever it is, right? That's sexy, to your carbon accounting, this credits, all that, which I would love to learn. I don't know, but nonetheless. And also, you touched on crypto, and I was trying to find the name of some of the companies, but there are several, not a lot, of organizations that are using cryptocurrency to serve local economies with the idea, again, of diversification, more levers that serve a more diverse, more resilient ecosystem. So, yeah, on the sexy and talk about all the ways this mass language can serve.
Thank you. Alina, what about you? What would you say? I mean, you've walked the path, the traditional path, right? In a certain way. I'm curious what you would say to these young people.
I mean, I would want to know if what was happening 15 years ago is still happening. Like, does anybody know? Is anybody aware of what's happening at the universities? You are aware, Donnie? What's happening?
I don't know what exactly you're offering. Asking,
Well,
Pretty big question. A lot.
Yeah.
I just saw a university shut down. Like, I mean, the truth is, just to be clear, like I think there's a whole upheaval on the in the realm of academics and institutions. So can you make more specific about what your question?
Yeah, are you talking about the path that people are being recommended?
Yeah, I mean, I just mean like when I decided to be an accountant, they were like, you need to go get your master's, because if you're not, what are you even doing? And then you need to be a CPA because all of the people that are going to recruit at this university are going to expect you to do that. So Big Four are going to be here. You better get a job with them, because once you do and you stay with them for at least 2 years, you're going to get a job anywhere you want after that. But that's all you got to do. Just hold out for 2 years. They're going to work you to death. And then you got a golden resume for the rest of your life. That was the story. That's what I did. They were true. The stories were true. And then I decided not to be an accountant, right? So it's like, so much for that. But, I remember thinking back then, like, man, it would be really cool if I could work for a smaller firm, and like maybe there would be a person there that would, eventually want to, teach me their ways, and then I could like own the firm or something like that one day. And that dream was just not, it was not, I think I just took the carrot, like the carrot was there. They were feeding us really nice food and promising us a nice salary. And I was like, okay, like the Alina back then valued safety and predictability and things like that, and did not think like, maybe I'll go network or like go see if I can meet these people, because they're not here. They're not at the university. So I think that's what I would say is like, if that is still going on, if that is still the path that people are being shepherded through, like I would say, I mean, first of all, I hope I would be prepared coming to this and not just put in a random stage. I hope that like I'd be able to gather some resources and be like, talk to these people, okay? They're local accountants here. Like, they've gone through these paths. Maybe they have connections for you. Maybe they, and maybe these people would be in different industries and not just like CPA, you know, tax accounting, bookkeeping, stuff like that. I don't know. I just think if I knew that there was a lot more opportunity earlier on and it was actually available and not just like some pipe dream, that would have been great for me. Because yeah, I worked my ass off for the first half of my career, and like only when I got to a smaller firm, I got my we still had a busy season, but only one, not two, because in Big Four, my life was like 6 months out of the year was nine to 10. Nine. So yeah, it was great.
Dan, what about you? What would you say if you were in front of a room full of high school kids?
I love the comment that Michelle made about accounting being the language of business. That's very similar to conversations that one of the conversations I had with one of my sons, and it really is what resonated with me when I came into the industry. And that was just the fact that no matter what role, no matter what opportunity, no matter what position you take in a company, money impacts what you do. If you're in a nonprofit and you're a program director, you have a budget. You have constraints that you have to stay within in order to be able to be successful. And you need to understand how each of the things that inputs affect your ability to make outputs. And to me, that's massive. And that's one of the parts that for my son, who wants to be a small business owner, who has a desire to go to trade school and become something from that perspective, the conversation he and I had was, you're going to want to know how to price. You're going to want to know how to sell your services. You're going to want to know what it costs to deliver to those things. And so no matter what your role is, accounting plays a big part in what it is that you do. And by understanding that, you have an opportunity to have way more experiences faster than people who don't have an understanding of that. You have an opportunity to excel a lot further when you have an understanding of knowing those things than not. But I will make a comment to what Alina just said, because I think this is really important. 15 years ago is when I was in school as well, 15, 16 years ago. And I actually presented my resume to a CPA firm, a local CPA firm, and they told me to go find another opportunity and way to get into accounting. And the reason why was because my GPA was so low. I was, not that it justified anything. I was not the greatest of students in my undergrad program and things to that nature. But it was really important for me to hear from them because accounting made sense to me. The idea of this equaling this, and there is a movement that has to take place. And I'm forever grateful actually for them telling me that, because it turned me to think more about the other process that goes along within the accounting space, that there is movement from an individual transaction from when you swipe a card, and there's an implication that it ties into everything else. And so for me, that opened up the doors for me to dive into the organization that I'm in today. But I started out as a bookkeeper. I started out at the grassroots bottom level of punching transactions into the system. And I was able to move faster up in the organization because the story made sense to me. The ability to connect and understand what the clients that I were working with, what they were trying to accomplish based off their inputs, were like, it really helped me to be able to create a greater understanding. And so the thing that I'm finding with this, the time that I've spent with more colleges and with more professionals that impact the college space, that is actually becoming more a part of the discussion. I did go back to school and did finish my master's. I finished it about 2.5, 3 years ago. And the part that I thought was amazing about those professionals is they had expectations that were required from a core educational standpoint they had to follow, but they put extra work onto the system that was about real life experiences. They were able to go out and get partnerships from the audit side with MindBridge to be able to show you how those types of softwares, tools, and platforms were going to completely change the auditing space moving forward. I had the opportunity to connect with a tax professional or a tax professor that did the exact same thing on the tax side and taught us in the aspect of those. And then of course had the ability to do some things on the CAS side, or client accounting services, or whatever it is you want to, however you want to relate the acronym. But had the ability to tie those into it. And the part that was really interesting for me is because I understood the story so much better from an education standpoint, my GPA was massively different, and it required a very different amount of real work from me. Not having done any of those things over the last 10, 12, 13 years, in audit and tax, it made more sense because I understood the story. And I think that's something that is such a huge opportunity for the accounting education space to dive further into. It's critical to understand debits and credits. I think that's really, really important too. But the storytelling aspect and understanding the implications is really what starts to change people's perspective. It's really what starts to change people's understanding about where it's going and what this means holistically. And it allows them to be able to tie it more personally to themselves, which actually is something that at the same interaction I had with Donnie, I had a similar interaction with Matthew, where we talked about the storytelling aspect. And I'm just going to tote on those two for just a quick second, but like those conversations actually changed the way that I do my job, because it made me think more holistically about the people I was interacting with. And I think that those opportunities of storytelling, those opportunities of data processing and thinking about a client experience from start to finish changes the way that we talk to people. It changes the passion that we get to share with them. It changes the excitement. It changes the limitation. It changes all these other things, but it stems from that emotion that you originally connect with. It stems from the data that you initially have and the system that it initially has. And you don't have to be a debit and credit expert to be able to start that piece. And that's the part that I love about it, is you don't have to be perfect in any of those pieces. You can start by just knowing a story and start by watching from the experiences around you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I do want to just briefly interrupt in the sense of this is beautiful, and I totally agree with everything you're saying, but there is a sense that there is a singular CEO that you're serving in your small business, and it could be a cooperative or some other ownership structure, or I'm thinking Bank of Nature. There are other stakeholders, so I'm just bringing that into our narrative a little bit.
Thank you,
I
Michelle.
love that, Michelle. Thank you so much for voicing that. That's one of the big things I've been focusing on recently, is how do we create more decentralized leadership teams? And so I'm super grateful that you brought those non-hierarchical methods into the conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, and actually I want to piggyback on that one, because I think one of the things that I've encountered in my interactions with accounting professionals, and I think more explicitly accounting professionals who've kind of followed the traditional path and seem on some level to kind of meet the expectations of what an accountant is, at least from a standards perspective, is that there's difficulty around two things. One, communication, right? Frequently, I've had challenges with clients in all of my iterations in the profession, where small business owners and entrepreneurs feel like it's very difficult to have conversations with accounting professionals, to be clear about what's going on, and really to be relatable, right? To be like, oh, I hear you use the words, but I don't understand what it means, and so I can't apply it to like decision making. But then there's also, I think, and I think this phrase is a little bit buzzy, but it's this ability to think outside of the box, right? And so it's that strategic dot connecting way of thinking, of like, oh, this over here and this over here is related, and somehow if we address this, it actually might pull things into a different path, right? And that money, and I'll kind of give an example here, because and then I'll ask a follow-up question. Is like, one of the things that I'm doing with one of my clients right now, to your point, Michelle, about sort of non-hierarchical or less hierarchical non-traditional organizations, is teaching a nonprofit arts organization, first of all, how to improve their financial practices, right? Improving their bookkeeping and accounting systems, implementing some new software, putting different practices around how they manage their cash flow and think about what's happening inside of their organization from a financial perspective. But the other thing that we're contending with is how do we create space for all of these other team members to feel empowered in the conversation around finances, because they don't have the same level of business acumen or financial acumen. And yet we're hoping through the organization that they'll be able to join the table, the finance table, and be able to contribute effectively to financial decision making. And so part of that's educating, you know, not just the executive director or the managing director, but other team members like program officers, right, or administrators inside the organization, they can actually participate. And then the other component to that is, which I think is something that we're contending with at the Accounting Alchemy Network, is that money comes with stories about how we relate to money and how money shows up in our lives and how it's impacted us personally. And so the other thing that we're doing inside of the organization is actually, I brought in a workshop facilitator to engage in a conversation around money stories, particularly traumatic money stories, and how that turns into certain personality types or behaviors that then show up in the room, right? So if you have a relationship to money that puts you in, let's say, a position where you're risk averse, right? That's good, right? For certain outcomes to be risk adverse, right? But in other cases, that might not actually be the archetype or the mindset that's going to move the conversation forward when you show up into the room, right? Or if you come into the conversation with a mindset around lack, right? We talk a lot about like the lack mentality or the limited, perspective, and that shows up in the room, right? And so there's this whole other body of work around our emotional relationship, psychological emotional relationship to money, that is very much a part of the conversation that we're having about the finance and accounting system. But then I'm sitting here with the managing director processing through this stuff, trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. And there's not a lot of resources online for me to go figure out what other people are doing to solve this problem, right? It's like if I wanted to make sure that their chart of accounts was perfect and that that they were handling all of their record keeping according to the 990, like that stuff is easy. You can Google it. There's webinars, there's white papers, there's tons of professionals, right? To go find a resource on how to create equity in finance conversations that addresses personal trauma, right, is not something that there's a lot of resources and people on. And so I say that to say that, like, that to me actually represents an opportunity, right? An opportunity for other kinds of professionals to be in the space to help guide what this conversation can become, right? And so I guess my first, I'm curious if anybody has any reactions or responses to that, but also I'm kind of curious what opportunities you all see in the profession as the profession is evolving and unfolding that actually creates more space for people to come to the table and be a part of the future of the profession. It's a big question.
I think Gary Tesler is probably one of the biggest singular people for individual trauma. And then I think for rethinking kind of structurally, it's Della Duncan. I don't know, Ingrid, would you tend to agree? Other people out there? So anyway,
I love that you just named a couple different people that we've interviewed here in the Accounting Alchemy Network. Barry and Della have both been interviewed by Matthew and myself, and great conversations. And they are fantastic resources, and also not the only resources. I mean, there's so many different opportunities out there. And when it comes to, you mentioned kind of the structural space, Della is brilliant when it comes to more regenerative economics and having those discussions, and also Kevin Bayuk from the Lift Economy organization and their next MBA program, creating a program that is business education that does not get included in the standard business degree, because the standard business degree is not talking about some of the biggest issues facing our world and how business and the way we go about business is impacting our greater world. So kind of seeing how all of that comes around, and I'm seeing Donnie's comment in the chat. I'm having a hard time seeing the direction connection of that, of the turn that conversation has taken to attracting young people to the profession. So looking at the more kind of trauma approach of Barry Tesler being a great example of the way that she has woven together psychology and her experience as an accounting professional and taken that intersection thereof, I think speaks to what Matthew was just saying around, could we be opening up new, essentially intersectionality, for lack of a better term, within the profession, also recognizing where the financial professions have been siloed into these separate categories. Michelle, what you were talking about, coming from the financial advisory perspective, but also banking, economics, and to a very large extent, those different financial professions are veiled in this mystery of occupational licensure and professional veneer that keeps these ideas kind of locked behind a curtain rather than out there for the public to better understand what it is that each of these different financial professions do, and how can we start to work together and take a multifaceted approach and looking at things from new story perspectives. So I love what Dan, you were saying about story and calling a new metaphor, new analogy in biomimicry and permaculture principles to figure out how can we shift the stories, the narratives that we're creating within the accounting profession to be able to relate more deeply to what it is that we want to create in our world today.
I think a 16 to 18-year-old, maybe woman, or woman identifying, would like a Barry Tesler money date with chocolate and candles. I mean, that's not actually something I wanted to totally embrace, and she gives me space for my spreadsheets. But I think that there could be plenty of room for diving deep into, I mean, kids are really introspective. And you're not probably going to be the young person that's interested in that narrative probably isn't the same young person that wants to work for a tech startup, so, but you're appealing to a broader audience. And I think, again, the permaculture piece, digging into the soil and having that regenerative story, it's very somatic. You're kind of getting that language of business down deep into the body, right? And reconnecting it. And I do think that there's appeal for young people. I don't know that we know exactly how to tell it, but God, the intimidation, kids hate, not all kids, but some kids hate money, right? They hate math. They're just,
where did they learn that?
Right, exactly.
That was taught to them somewhere.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, and Don, I guess I just want to be like explicit. So there's the language that we use to talk about it right here, and then there's how we would talk about it in the context of the age group and the demographic. And I guess my point being that, like, I was taught as a young person that the only kind of accountant there is the person that's really good at math and wants to sit at a desk in an office and like just be on the computer doing the thing, right? And the truth is that's actually, you can, there's many more opportunities in the space that require skill sets that, like, that don't have to be that number crunching math person behind the computer. And I would even go so far as to say that that's actually the thing that's been lacking, right? To be honest, like and the reason why I've had so much difficulty navigating that space between the small business customer that is over here and then the accountant that's over here is because not in that. Now whether or not it's the acumen of the young person coming in, and that we're just prioritizing the math aptitude, and that's who kind of gets brought into the spectrum, and or that when these young people get brought into these programs, again, we're prioritizing the technical skill set, but we're not actually teaching them how to communicate and translate and relate to people, so that it extends beyond that. I think, but I guess my point being that, and I think this is kind of what you're saying, Michelle, a little bit, is like, if I saw that there was a path that didn't have to do with being the numbers cruncher, then I actually might have considered it. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I also think there's a piece here too around, which, you know, I think, Alina, your question about sort of how educational institutions are presenting the path is really important, because I actually don't think in many ways that our education system is doing a disservice across the board on a lot of levels, right? This is one of those spaces where it's like, you know, what are they teaching these young people, right, about the profession? And yeah, so I guess, Donnie, I'd like to check in with you, since you kind of brought that point up, and I think it's a really important point. Let's hear your thoughts.
You know, that's where I think we started off early on this, really talking about the attraction and the values that the profession has. So I would, distill is not the right word, but you know, coming down to, you know, we need a better story about our profession and what we really do, and the fact that it's not a math profession. I mean, we talk about that all the time, and it's not only a tax profession. That's the other misnomer. So really coming up and showing, hey, there are skills beyond this. It's a foundation, the language of business, right? All of these things that we're saying. But I think also the point that to be successful is not just doing those things, right? And that's what I think a lot of you are getting towards, is it's about the thing that's differentiates the great accountant from the good accountant is the ability to communicate, the ability to empathize, the ability to tell a compelling story while maintaining your integrity and ensuring that everything that's happening is ethical. So it's really about this package that we bring, and through that, enabling people to make better decisions that are more holistic in consideration, rather than just about the money, about the profit. And also that we can get very complex. And I mean, you guys just did a really great example. Like, we can deal with very complex things. And I always, every time I think about that, I go back to the AICPA's purpose of an accountant. I mean, they call it purpose of CPA. I call it purpose of accounting, because I think it applies to all of us, is to make sense of a changing and complex world. What we do is we really look at what is the situation that's occurring, what constraints are we working with, the policy, the regulation, the law, what tax regs, whatever it is, and the money constraints. You only have this much budget, and really use that creatively to go, well, what can we do that we can accomplish that objective, whatever it is, whether it's a personal objective or a business objective, with the constraints that we're working with, that's going to make sense to the client that we're working with, whether it's a family, whether it's a business owner, whether it's a big corporate. Right? To me, that's kind of the magic that we do, is really pull all that together. And it does require more interdisciplinary. It does require non-math skills and non-accounting skills. So to really show these students, I think we have to show that we really are a more holistic profession. And we're actually one of the few holistic professions. When you look at a lot of the others, they operate all in their silos. We're one of the few professions that actually crosses life and business and everything. And I always joke with my other accounting friends that we apply accounting to everything that we do. Like when you think about risk management, you do it in life, right? The decision on, am I going to wear my seatbelt or not? That's a risk management decision. How much insurance am I going to put on my car? Right? That's a risk management decision. Am I going to charge this big thing on this credit card and hope I pay it off, or what am I going to do? All of those are different financial decisions that we do on an everyday basis in life, that if we bring in a lot of this discipline, it really helps people be successful as a whole. And that's why that's usually what I tell people and say, well, what do you do? I help people be more successful. What do you mean, what are you doing, people? Well, give me an example. And whatever, they can tell me whatever industry they want. I'll give you an example of how the accounting plays out and how we help somebody in that industry make that better decision.
Yeah, thank you. So we have 5 minutes left before the conclusion of said social forum. So I want to just do a round of any last thoughts or comments before we close the gathering. And yeah, I'll leave the space open. Michelle, I see you came off mute.
Yeah, sorry. So I just wanted to emphasize that the Next Economy MBA now has a book, so it's accessible. And I'm going to point back, I think it was Paul Hawken that wrote some of the original transparent bookkeeping stories that I read way back in the day. So just putting those out there as part of a curriculum for non-academic or academic.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, and that being said, I guess as we debrief, if you have any other suggestions on resources or next steps, that's super useful. So thank you, Michelle, for that. Who would like to share a final thought?
I just wanted to echo my sentiments to the comment that Donnie made. I think that there's so much opportunity in the space that we exist in that really comes from a narrative that we see and connect with ourselves. And I think that is where the opportunity is for change. I think that's where the opportunity for the profession is as a whole, because ultimately the goal would be to change the way the story is being told, so that the story is being told in a way that represents all of us in the things that we're trying to accomplish and doing. And right now, the hard part is there's a narrative that's been created that it's not inclusive of all of the pieces and all of the functions and facets that we are. And so I think that's the part that's exciting for me is as we as a profession connect more with the people that are outside of it, there becomes a greater opportunity for us to share the story and the journey that we're all on, and hopefully change the landscape of the profession and what people's perception are of it, so that we can create a greater opportunity for people in the future.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I guess I'll share my final thought is I remember coming into this profession not knowing anybody, and then all of a sudden I'm getting to know all these really amazing people, and I'm like, wait, you're an artist and you do this really cool thing and you do more than just account. And all of a sudden, like I just realized how cool all these people were. And so my advice to to all you accountants out there is to like be yourself and to be your authentic self, because I think there's something perhaps problematic about this sort of professional veneer that we've placed around the profession that makes it occur as though everybody in the profession is, stale folks in suits crunching numbers. And so I think the more we as individuals can get out there and express ourselves and show that we're multi-talented, multifaceted, creative human beings, I think younger people will see that and be like, wow, that person's really cool. Right? I want to be just like them, right? Oh, they're an accountant? Okay, awesome, right? It like opens up the door of possibility. So yeah. Ingrid, do you have any final thoughts on your end?
Oh, wow. I guess mostly just thinking about that question of, okay, so what's our next step? How do we engage these young leaders and get these ideas in front of them? How do we, I love what Alina posted in the chat, that she thinks it would be cool to invite university students to forward-thinking accounting conferences to get them outside the education system agenda. And also, how do we get into those universities and let them know what's going on? And I think that Donnie and Center for Accounting Transformation have some great strategies that they're working on that front. Just, little keep an eye out for things that might be coming down the pipe. But also thinking about what questions would we want to ask them about what are your passions? What is the change that you want to see in the world? And how can you be that change and apply your special sauce, your skills, your superpowers to creating the change that you want to see in the world? And how might you be able to do that through the accounting profession? And that might inspire people. And we need to be interacting with those people in order to plant that seed. So with that, I'll toss it to Alina for last thought.
Yeah, I mean, I have several or similar questions going through my mind, Ingrid, and something that just came back up in my mind is that when I was still doing accounting, I was in Denver. I was actually like a mentor at the Denver University there for some of the accounting students. And I think that might be a good area to like, I don't know if they'd still accept me. Well, I don't even live there anymore, but like, I don't know if they would let me be a mentor anymore. But if they would, that'd be pretty cool.
Awesome. Thank you, Lena. All right. Well, thank you, Dan and Donnie, for spearheading this conversation with us, and Michelle and Lena and Ingrid for participating in the conversation. We appreciate you. And for those of you who are watching the recording, whether it's on YouTube, wherever it's going to be, the comments down there, on LinkedIn or on Facebook, please feel free to contribute your thoughts, your questions, and your comments so the conversation can continue. I know we brought up some really juicy stuff in here, and I'm really excited to see what happens with this content as we continue to leverage the work that we do at the Accounting Alchemy Network to have an impact on the accounting profession. So please, if you are watching this on YouTube and you're not a community member of the Accounting Alchemy Network, you'll find our website in the box below or the field below. Come check us out. Check out our brand new website with some new content. Figure out what that regenerative accountant is and means to you. Join our newsletter and then join the community. And with that, have a beautiful day. And thank you, everyone.